technology. I know everybody and their brother loves to talk about next generation firewall, and some people talk about next generation IPS. I know you kind of sort of do both in the middle and above and beyond and on the side. Where do you sit on the fence for these things? Is application awareness and visibility, is that just something that should be firewall, IPS, or is that a separate technology, or how do you see those lines?
I think it should be integrated for the most part. What it represents to us is another layer of context. When we're looking at traffic on the wire, we talk about contextual awareness of the environment that we're analyzing. So basically the systems that we have figure out what they're defending, and they figure out how to configure themselves and all their anti-evasion parameters and stuff like that based on what we observe. So bringing the application awareness to the table is just, this is another level of awareness that we have that we'll use for self-tuning, rule selection, and doing, context-enabled security. As far as kind of where it belongs, I think it's a piece of the puzzle when you're talking about network security. You really need to have as much awareness as you can muster, and then everything. What we like to say at SourceFIRE internally when we're talking about our products is, if I can identify something, I should be able to control it. So if I can identify a threat, I should be able to shut it down. If I can identify an application, I should be able to modify its behavior based on what we can observe, how we can interact with protocols and stuff like that. Yeah. Our network device kind of exists as a spectrum of capabilities. We have one universal platform that we run all of our network technology on. So our next-gen firewall and our next-gen IPS both run on there, as well as our advanced malware protection for firepower runs on there as well. So,
once upon a time, I would have called a device like that a UTM, but I know that's a bad word. And I see you shaking already. It's IPS, malware, and firewall. Is there a need for analysts or somebody else to come up with a better word than UTM, better than next-gen firewall and next-gen IPS? Because it seems to me like it's a lot more than just SNORT that I was running and my basic firewall rules.
Yeah, it's definitely more. The UTMs usually have termination on them, like they'll host a mail gateway and they'll host VPN proxies and all that kind of stuff. So we don't call it a UTM because we feel like it's a more enterprise oriented feature set that's not really developed around proxying and terminating connections and stuff like that, or acting as the front end to the mail server and the front end to the web server. Is much more about threats. Really, is what we're primarily interested in dealing with controls, access control and policy enforcement as a part of it, as well as looking at files. But yeah, you're not necessarily wrong. What I call it, I'm an engineer, so I come up with bad names for things. So
what do you call it?
I call it a network control point, because that's kind of what it is and does.
Is the network control point, is that the source of truth for security on the network, or is that outside and where a SIM vendor lives and wherever that might be?
No, I would say it depends what your definition of security is and what you think is actually securing you. I like to make the point that the security models that we have today, we talk about vulnerability management, identity and access management, firewalling, and crypto and all this stuff. This is security, but the problem with a lot of that is that if you get compromised, it all kind of falls apart. Yeah. You get popped, your crypto doesn't matter anymore because they've got your keys or they've got your passwords, your identity and access management stuff goes by the wayside because they get your credentials and so on and so forth. So from our standpoint, the world of security starts at being able to maintain the integrity of your environment, which is all about dealing with threats. So if you're going to deal with threats, you've got to have two primary points of presence. You've got to have a point of presence on the network, and you've got to have a point of presence on the devices, the mobile devices or virtual platforms or whatever. We've built that. And then our strategy is, we talk about visibility and control, which I know a lot of people are talking about these days, but our strategy is, if you look at what we've built, like the stuff that SourceFIRE has built in-house, besides, SNORT and things like that, the first really original, nobody had done it before, technology that we built at SourceFIRE was a technology called RNA, Real-Time Network Awareness, which is a passive network discovery system. And what it does is it maps the network based on watching the network traffic. It's kind of like a passive sonar in some way. It lets the objects in the environment generate, tells about themselves by the noise that they generate. So we built that, which is a primary, functionally a primarily an awareness technology. It just tells you what's out there, so you can array your defenses appropriately. And now what we do with it is we have it recommend your policies, and we have it analyze your events and tell you which ones are important based on your real-time configuration of your environment and things like that. So we talked about visibility as a function unto itself, as opposed to just a feature set. Visibility is the foundation of doing security. Once you got visibility, the things you can identify, you can control.
In your network control appliance, is Web Application Firewall a feature? Is that a product, or how do you view WAFs?
I think that they tend to be products because they're very focused.
Yeah.
So I've seen people use SNORT to do it. You can use SNORT to do it. I know one of the web app scanner vendors was NT Objectives. NT Objectives did an analysis where they have a web app scanner that'll generate SNORT rules to use SNORT as a web app firewall, and they did a head-to-head test with kind of the big guys in there and SNORT. So I think there were 3 or 4 vendors, and then SNORT with their scanner, and SNORT came in second place. So it's more of a focus thing than a can it do it or not, or are we going to build one or not? And we've never really focused hard on that sector because it's just it's not usually why people hire us. People hire us to keep threats off their network. And I know the web apps can get popped and stuff like that, but people seem more concerned with regular hacking, I guess I would say. So it's an interesting phenomenon. We've known about this for years that you can use SNORT to do that, but it's just not something we've ever run into.
Sure.
That maybe the biggest threat that I see day in, day out really is the inertia of the organizations that are trying to protect themselves is kind of the biggest problem. And what I mean by that, so we go into accounts and we say, hey, we've got, what we feel is a really comprehensive infrastructure for managing the threats in your environment. It's got network components, and everybody's like, ooh, network, I like network, and it's got endpoint components too, and everybody's like, oh, we can't touch the endpoint, we don't control the desktop, desktop's not our responsibility. And I kind of look at them like, well, when the desktop gets popped and your whole enterprise gets owned, is it your responsibility or problem then? They're like, oh, yeah, it's huge problem. It's like, the organizational structure, I think the organizational structures that too many enterprises have are directly contrary to their security interests these days. And there's a lot of institutional inertia on that that's preventing it from getting reformed. And I think as an industry, certainly the press and analysts should be talking about it more because it's really counterproductive. The nation-state stuff will come and go, wax and wane as targets get more or less juicy or less permeable. But I wouldn't say that these guys are worse threat than those guys or a worse threat than those other guys because they're all approximately equal threats. It's just what their appetites are and how voracious they are at any given. But I think this is an organizational structure issue, right? So it's not just the CSO. It's whoever's managing IT is separate from the guy who's managing IT security in a lot of places. And that's a broken model. IT security is a function of IT, and in fact, it should be the foundation of IT in a lot of ways, right? You need to deliver these services, but they actually have to be secured. And this is a cliche to end all cliches, but people keep on bolting on security after the fact, as opposed to designing it in. And it's a huge problem. And now we've got what I'm seeing as I get out there and I engage more fully than just having devices on the network. I start trying to sell a full spectrum. So I'm just seeing we've got real organizational issues in a lot of these places that are artifacts of these org structures that have been in place for whatever decades, and they need to go. I mean, because we're seeing a big shift now, right? I go into customers and I say, if you were going to get compromised, would you do security differently? And they go, yeah, of course I would. Well, you're going to get compromised. So why are you doing security the way that you've been doing it for the last 10 years? It's not an if, it's a when. So it's a real question. These guys don't really have good answers for it, and the amount of institutional change that's really required to give the security guys a seat at the table with the desktop team that decides what software gets loaded on the machines, or the server team, or whatever that decides how these devices are configured. It's just not happening in so many places, and it's a real problem.
Got it.
I feel very comfortable with our product strategy and the technologies we've built and everything that we've kind of the array of stuff that we have. I think the biggest challenge from a security standpoint is kind of getting in and getting people to change their mindsets about how security is going to be done for the next 10 years as opposed to how you've been doing it, because it really has changed. So I think that's a big challenge. Organizationally within the company, the biggest challenge day to day is just managing the 600-person machine that's moving at 1,000 miles an hour. And make sure everybody's kind of pulling on the oars in the same direction. But I think from an industry standpoint, from an industry-facing standpoint, it's really getting in and getting people to start thinking about, what you're actually trying to do. What is the problem you're trying to solve when you're doing security? I would posit that the first problem you're trying to solve is keeping people from breaking in, or if they do get in, getting them back out quickly, right? So that's, I think, what our kind of chief challenge is, to get people to think about, security is not access control. Security is threat prevention. And access control can be a part of that, but it's not the beginning and end of it.